So here, reading the plague through its 17 weather. But what helps, I realize, is that you need to read before and after the sentences where the word weather appears. So I will quickly do this maybe for those who already have read it, maybe it's kind of a refresher. For those who haven't, maybe you get a bit of a summary of the book. So yeah, I quickly do this. In autumn, on the other hand, we have deluges of mud. Only winter brings really pleasant weather. Perhaps the easiest way of making a town's acquaintance is to ascertain how the people in it work, how they love, and how they die. The most he could do was to put the matter up to the prefect. But while these talks were going on, the weather changed for the worse. On the day following old Michael's death, the sky clouded up and there were brief torrential downpours. Hemmed in by lines and lines of whitewashed walls, walking between rows of dusty shops, or riding in the dingy yellow streetcars, you felt, as it were, trapped by the climate. This, however, was not the case with Ryu's old Spanish patient, who welcomed this weather with enthusiasm. "It cooks you," he said. He then asked the doctor if there was any serious danger to the town. Ryu answered that he couldn't say. "It must be the weather," the police officer decided. "That's what it is." No doubt it was the weather. As the day wore on, everything grew sticky to the touch, and Ryu felt his anxiety increasing after each visit. Ryu said nothing. About this time, the weather appeared set fair, and the sun had drawn up the last puddles left by the recent rain. There was a serene blue sky flooded with golden light each morning, with sometimes a drone of planes in the rising heat. All seemed well with the world. For instance, some of our fellow citizens became subject to a curious kind of servitude, which put them at the mercy of the sun and the rain. Looking at them, you had an impression that for the first time in their lives, they were becoming, as some would say, weather conscious. A burst of sunshine was enough to make them seem delighted with the world, while rainy days gave a dark cast to their faces and their mood. A few weeks before, they had been free of this absurd subservience to the weather, because they had not to face life alone. The person they were living with had to some extent the foreground of their little world. But from now on, it was different. They seemed at the mercy of the sky's caprices, in other words, suffered and hoped irrationally. Yes, everyone sleeps at that hour, and this is reassuring, since the great longing of an unquiet heart is to possess constantly and consciously the loved one, or failing that, to be able to plunge the loved one, when a time of absence intervenes, into a dreamless sleep timed to last unbroken until the day they meet again. Shortly after Father Panulu's sermon, the hot weather set in with a vengeance. On the day following the unseasonable downpour of that Sunday, summer blazed out above the housetops. The varying aspects of the sky, the smells rising from the soil that mark each change of season, were taken notice of for the first time. Everyone realized with dismay that the hot weather would favor the epidemic, and it was clear that summer was setting in. The cries of swifts in the evening air above the housetops were growing shriller. He often asked Teru to say how long he thought the epidemic would last. "They say," Teru informed him, "that cold weather stamps out diseases of this type." The manager looked aghast. When Ryu was preparing to leave the church, a violent gust swept up the nave through the half-open doors and buffeted the faces of the departing congregation. It brought with it a smell of rain, a tang of drenched sidewalks, warning them of the weather they would encounter outside. An old priest and a young deacon who were walking immediately in front of Ryu had much difficulty in keeping their headdress from blowing away. El Souls Day that year was very different from what it had been in former years. True, the weather was seasonable. There had been a sudden change, and the great heat had given place to mild autumnal air. As in other years, a cool wind blew all day, and big clouds raced from one horizon to the other, trailing shadows over the houses upon which fell again, when they had passed, the pale gold light of a November sky. The field was dotted with several hundred tents, inside which one had glimpses of bedding and bundles of clothes or rugs. The stands had been kept open for the use of the internees in hot or rainy weather. But it was a rule of the camp that everyone must be in his tent at sunset. Before them, the darkness stretched out into infinity. Ryu could feel under his hand the gnarled, weather-worn visage of the rocks, and a strange happiness possessed him. Turning to Teru, he caught a glimpse on his friend's face, the same happiness, a happiness that forgot nothing, not even murder. Actually, while the epidemic did not stop from one day to another, it declined more rapidly than we would reasonably have expected. With that first week of January, an unusually persistent spell of very cold weather settled in and seemed to crystallize above the town. Yet never before had the sky been so blue. Day after day, its icy radiance flooded the town with brilliant light, and in the frost-cleansed air, the epidemic seemed to lose its virulence, and in each of 3 consecutive weeks, a big drop in the death roll was announced. So fight away. In the course of that day, the weather, which after being very cold had grown slightly milder, broke in a series of violent hailstorms, followed by rain. At sunset, the sky cleared a little, and it was bitterly cold again.